What we'd like to do today is work on a real heavy bob kind of shape. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to establish the bob, and then I'm going to use that bob outline as a guide to work the interior. What I will do is on this particular side, I'm going to work from the front towards the back. And then on this side, I'm going to work from the back towards the front. But first what I want to do is section off the haircut. And how I want to approach this is I want to establish an outline all the way through from front to back. So what I will do is I'm going to take a section that works from the apex and it follows this natural round of the head. So like, for example, if I put my comb on the head, I find the apex. But if I keep my comb on the head and I bring that all the way around, it's touching all the way through on this natural round of the head, and that's what turns into your occipital ridge. So basically, the apex and the occipital are the same thing, they just live in two different areas of the head shape. So what that does for me is it will give me a consistent amount of hair to create my outline all the way through. So sectioning that off is the first thing to do. And I wanted to show you this. I didn't pre-section it for a reason, because I find that sectioning is one of the most difficult parts of the haircut. And it can take quite a bit of time if you're not doing it right. And I think what the key thing is to understand is that you use parts of your body to do these things for you. So you've got to understand the mechanics of how your arm works. So if I approach this like it's needle and thread, so if I start trying to do this, I hold my comb this way and I try and draw the line, then I'm using my wrist, right? Then basically try and draw a circle with your wrist, right? When you finish that circle, it looks like a potato. It's not a circle, it's symmetrical, right? So what we have to do is we have to put symmetry over it. So for me to do that, it's all about the shoulder and the elbow, because the elbow and the shoulders are basically like hinges of a door. Right? So all I have to do is place my comb on the apex and bring this elbow to my hip. So use the shoulder, the hinge of the shoulder, to do this for me. And by doing that, it creates that perfect circular section, right? That's because I'm allowing the hinge of my shoulder, my arm, to do that for me. So if I try to do that this way, I'm going to be all over the place and it's not going to look pretty, all right? So it's all about consistency. Another way of doing that is also basically comb the hair in the direction that you want it to be parted. So I'm combing from the apex to the occipital. And you can see all of these options that I have now. So basically I could just choose one of those and that's already sectioned for me as well. So you pick which way you want to do it. Basically it can be much easier than how you're probably doing it. So I take my circular section and I'm going to isolate that. If you guys have any questions, only good questions though, that is, please. Just kidding, you can ask whatever you want. Please go ahead and ask that. Katie will ask the questions for you. So we'll take that and we'll put that out of the way. So I'm going to work this right side first and then I'll do the left side afterwards. And again, I'm going to do this other side completely different to this side, but we're going to end up with the same haircut, the same shape. So what I want to achieve is I want this heavy, long bob. So basically I'm going to cut the bob right here, which is a cut-off point for a bob. Once that bob hits the shoulders, it's no longer bobbed. It's not an uninterrupted line. It's now interrupted by the shoulder. So I want it either at the shoulder or slightly above that shoulder. You could cut this haircut at any length that's below the hairline, okay? So it's a real heavy bob that we're working on. But instead of me starting back here and working my line from the back towards the front, I'm actually gonna start the line in the front and work towards the back. For some of you guys that have watched me throughout the years, you'll know that that's kind of a thing that I like to do. And it's not only easier for myself, it's also easier for the client. So we're talking about the psychology of cutting hair here. So if I start in the back, then there's an element of surprise, isn't there? You're like, what's going on back there? The client can't really see that. So by starting through the front, I immediately get the length that I'm after. I don't have to guess back here to reach that length. And I also gain the trust of my client immediately. Right? I think we've all been the client, we've sat in the chair. You imagine someone stood behind your head for 15 minutes cutting away and you've no idea what's going on. It can really play up here. So I'm gonna bring the mannequin up as high as I possibly can. So if I was doing this on a real client, a real person, then I would probably have that person stand up so that we can see exactly what's going on and we can get to a level which is eye level. I don't really want to be bending the knee, the waist so much, so I try to keep it on the higher end so that I don't have to do too much of this. Sitting down, you could sit down when you cut outlines because you need the hair to fall at 0 degrees. You need it in its natural fall. So what I've done is I've sprayed the hair with plenty of water, and what that's going to do is it's going to add weight to the hair. So gravity will then pull that water through the hair and it's bringing it into more of a natural fall. And so that makes it much easier for you. So I'll add a little bit more. The more the merrier in this case. And then what I will do is I'll now comb the hair into position. So we know that when we wear a haircut or wear the bob, we don't wear the hair in our face, so we don't want to cut that in the face either. We want to cut it where it's going to be worn, and that is generally going to be behind the cheekbone. That's what that cheekbone does for us, is it keeps the hair behind it. So I'm going to keep that hair all the way behind that cheekbone, so it's falling in the sides, it's not falling in the face. The cheekbone forward is the face, okay? And so it's literally the same as this round in the back. So that is basically the sides. So that's what I'm going to cut first, and then I'll move into the back afterwards. So again, combing it into position. Now that it's in position, it looks like water coming down a waterfall. I don't need to come back up to the roots and keep combing through. The more I comb from the roots to ends, the more I'm always going to see something different down here. All right? So I really just want it to be in position. Now, the reason why I'm going to start here is because of this thing right there. The ear. That's one of the hardest points of the haircut. And generally, classically, we leave it to the last. So we start back here and we work all the way through. We've got this really nice bob, and then all of a sudden we don't take into consideration that the ear sticks out from the head and all that kind of stuff, and then we end up with a hole or the front ends up shorter. So to eliminate any of that, I'm going to start where the ear is, because there's no ear in front of it, there's no ear behind it. All right, so I don't get that element of surprise. So I'll start at the ears. If this was on the other side, I would do the same thing and start at the ear and move backwards. Let's just move this light over a little bit. So let's start. So I'm going to place the comb in lower than the earlobe, so I'm not raking through the roots all the way through. I'm combing the hair that's in the part of the head shape where it's actually just hanging. It's not living on the head shape. So once I do that, I use this like a ruler. So I want a line that is level with the ground. Some people want to call that square, all right? I tap above the ear, I do it a few times. I go all the way down to the comb. So you see what's happening. I'm allowing this natural wave to do what it wants. And I'm just going to cut my line in. Again, I'm going to keep it on the longer side. So loosening all of that excess tension, allowing the hair to do exactly what it wants. All right, natural fall. If I use my fingers, that's not a natural fall. So the comb is adding just a minimal amount of control. So therefore it adds a minimal amount of tension. So you can see when I walk away from that, I have a line that is consistent. It needs to look good without you involved. That's the key to this haircut. So the more you do to it with yourself, then it's not going to look good without you involved. So I have to kind of step away from the vehicle and let it do it. So I allow that hair to fall naturally, and now I move into the back. I stand directly in front of what I'm going to cut. So there's no square shape on the floor that I walk or anything like that. I actually walk what's like a U shape, because when the hair falls, that's the shape that it is. If we look up at it, we see like a horseshoe kind of shape. So that's the line that I'm cutting. It's a horseshoe. But the line that I'm wanting to cut is literally level with the ground. I could cut it A-line so it gets heavier towards the front, or I could cut it round where it gets heavier towards the back. I could cut it zigzag if I wanted to, right? It's just the line. So I comb this down. I'm using this as my guide. And again, I want to tap, 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 tap away any excess tension, right? I'm not going to tilt the head forward here either. I'm not looking to graduate this line. I want this line to be heavy. So if I wanted this line to bevel in and graduate, then I would tilt the head forward. But I want it to remain quite heavy. So that basically means one length. That's the same thickness at the roots as it is at the ends. So picture it like a phone book. So if I wanted to bevel that, and I don't want it to be quite as thick, this line, if I want it to bevel in, then I will tilt the head forward and I press the hair onto the scalp. So basically what I've got there is I've got an outline that really just matches the neckline through here on this mannequin. So what people would call square or level, that's what we're going for. So now that I've done that, I've now established my perimeter. See, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bob with graduation. I'm not going to do a graduated bob, right? I'm not going to put graduation in the nape and then sit the bob on top of it, right? I'm not going to put the foundation in and then put the house on top of it. This is the house, right? All I want to do now is bevel this. I don't want it to be everything falling to keep it one length. I want now to bevel what I've got. All right, so I have a very strong one length outline, and now I'm going to bevel that. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to cut this haircut backwards, right? So I want this to be the heaviest point, and I want it to get lighter towards the back. So triangular in shape, right? So triangular graduation. But to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to work vertical diagonal back sections in this crown area all the way through. I'm going to use no over direction. And what's going to happen is, see, because I've pulled this first section down, if I was to now pull that section out vertically and use elevation, look what's happening here. We can see that it's shorter at the bottom and it's getting longer towards the top, right? That's because I pulled everything down to 0 degrees, right? So technically this is longer than the hair down here. But if we leave it all down here, we keep it super heavy. See, what I want to do now is I want to bring these sections out and I want to add this circular section on top of this. So I'm going to only graduate what's in the circular section. So the circular section is very key to this haircut. See, if I take a larger section, then I'm going to get more graduation. If I take a smaller section, then I'm going to get less graduation. All right, so depending on what hair texture and density you're working on or what your desired result is, that's going to change this circular section. So smaller section, less graduation. Bigger circle, more graduation. All right, so let's get started on this. So vertical diagonal back sections into the hair that's not been cut. So this has already been cut. So I'm going to move back into this and I'm going to take a vertical diagonal back section. So what that means is the base of the section sits behind the top of the section. This sits behind this. So within that section, what's going to happen is I'm going to pull this hair out and I'm going to make this shorter and this longer. All right? And because it's on a diagonal, when that falls, it will fall heavier in the front and get lighter towards the back. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll take a little bit of the front. Remember, this has already been cut all the way down here. So I'm going to use it as my guide now. I'm going to choose to cut this on the outside of my fingers so that you guys can see what I'm doing. But I could do this on the inside of my fingers as well as the outside of my fingers. But I'm going to do it this way so you guys can see what's going on. straight out from the head, no higher than the natural round of the head shape. It's graduation, so we want to build that weight. We don't want to remove it. And so what I'm looking at here is, I can see that's my outline. All I'm doing is adding this to it. So now I'll take my next section. It's going to be the same exact process. Now remember, the circular section gets greater towards the back. So there's going to be more and more hair coming off as I work through. Again, vertical diagonal back section. And you don't want the section to be too wide, too thick, because then you'll over-direct forward. All right? You want it to be correctly sized to you, how you hold hair. So basically, I use the thickness of one of my fingers. I don't go any thicker than that. But obviously, if I had larger fingers, then I wouldn't want to use that as a size gauge. So no over direction. If I push the hair forward, then it's going to get heavier towards the back. Remember, pull away from what you want to keep. In this case, all I'm pulling away from is the top. I'm using a finger angle to pull away from what I want to keep. So I can see that I've got this nice heavy bob, but it's already starting to get a little bit of a bevel to it. So the reason why I wanted to show you this is because we all go for the standard layered bob. We cut the bob in and then we layer it to give it some form of movement and some form of shape. But what if you don't want layers? What if you don't have enough hair to layer it? Why don't you work with graduation? And I find that's like one of the techniques that most people won't go for because it's not the easiest technique out there. It's very easy to layer hair. Layering hair is a removal of weight. If I went like that, that would be a removal of weight, you know? But you see, graduation is a lot more technical. But it achieves such a beautiful technique. You're actually building weight into the haircut instead of taking it away. So there's my guide. I'm just going to move to it. Again, no over direction. I can see my guide right behind that, and I'll follow that up. So this is the hair that's in that circular section that was disconnected from my outline. And now I'm coming through and I'm just connecting it. So you start to see that bevel into the outline now. So basically, guys, I've just taken that corner off of it being one length and now making it into a graduation. So a real heavy bob that's designed to move backwards and forwards. It's designed to swing, right? That's what that bob line will always do. So adding that graduation just allows it to sit into place a little better. And it takes that corner off the back. And that's what triangular shapes do. We're going to make it lighter in the back, slightly heavier in the front. So I've now reached that natural round of the head. So in order for me to keep my sections vertical diagonal back, I now have to pivot around the crown. I can't keep moving back along this line and expect to keep my sections vertical diagonal. It doesn't work like that. So it's back to back to back to back until I get to the round of the head. Then it's to pivot all the way around. So again, only taking my previous section as the guide. If I take too much guide, I push the hair forward into it, and it's going to make the haircut heavier in the back. And that's not necessarily a good bob, that's more of a blob. I think there's just something wonderful and beautiful about triangular when it in shape on the human head, and it really works with the bone structure. That's how your cheekbone is, it's how your jawline is.
We have a question.
We have a question, please go ahead.
Can you start from the back as well?
Okay, great question. You joined us a little bit late, I think. I'm going to do the other side from the back towards the front. So I'm showing you two different alternatives to this shape. So this side, probably a little bit more on the advanced side because I'm obviously cutting something backwards. We're conditioned to pull away from what we want to keep. That's the premise of hair cutting. right? So generally you would start in the back and pull backwards, it's going to get heavier, right? So I'm actually doing something backwards. I just wanted to show you the mechanics of what's possible in haircutting. And that's what we do at Knowledge Destroys Fear. You know, we just break haircuts down and understand the mechanics of them, what creates them. You know, it's not just a haircut, it's actually a movement of haircutting that does it. So what you're seeing here, guys, is you see me joining into my outline on the underneath. So remember that first section, I took my curved section from the apex to the occipital and I created my outline all the way through. So I'm always using that outline as I work through to connect into. So I'm just gonna have a little check just to see how things are going. So diagonal forward, I'm gonna check more horizontally because I'm working on that vertical aspect. And you can see my weight pushing towards the front there. So as I'm working in the back, there's more hair coming off because the circular section was all the way down into the occipital. And that's how you're seeing the shape form. So this is what's happening right now. There's my outline and there's the graduation that's happening. So it's a very low, heavy, blunt bob.
It looks good.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, we have another one.
Go on then.
Would this be a reverse layered cut from the classic and then the comment got
What's
cut
that?
off? Would this be a reverse layered cut?
Okay, so terminology, yes, in a sense. It's not what we call reverse layering. We call it graduation. It's the opposite to layering. So my exact opposite to what I'm doing this. This is graduation. The exact opposite to graduation is technically concave layering. So it's shorter on the inside, longer towards the bottom. So layering isn't always the opposite to graduation. There are two forms of layers. So in concave layering, it's the exact opposite. So you could say reverse layering. I think that's one of the big things in the industry is terminology. Lots of people wanting to argue with me of lately about terms and stuff. But I'm English. Most of you guys are probably American. And we say things slightly differently. So you can see how it's joining into that underneath. So I've worked all the way around into the centre back area. So I'll take my last section now before we approach the other side. So again, there's no over direction in these sections. If I over direct the hair forward, it's going to get heavier towards the back. If you pull away from something, it gets longer where you're pulling away from. In this case, the pulling away has been my angle that I've done. So now you can see that. Just nice heavy bob, got my outline all the way through. So again, this is a bob with graduation, not a graduated bob. A graduated bob, there is an interruption of this outline. It comes up, then it drops. And that's because the weight line is above the hairline. It's in this area. All right, with this, we're much lower. You can see my weight line is down here. So it's only a sliver of graduation if you think about what's happening. So we've got that going on. So now let's do it from the back towards the front. Let's do the same thing, but we'll just switch the process of it. And the reason why I'm doing this is that's to show you there's always more than one way to do a haircut. If you look on my Instagram page, you'll notice a lot of different variations of a lot of the same shapes, and that's what I like to do. I like to show you guys all these options that there are. A lot of the time, I think most of us learn haircutting in the most difficult way. My background is Vidal Sassoon. That's where I started my career. I went to school there. I became a teacher there, blah, blah, blah. But I know that that's like the hardest way you could possibly do a haircut. So it's been my kind of mission, you know, being a teacher, an educator, a full-time teacher my whole career, to kind of show people different ways of doing things so that you can understand all of this stuff. You know, the breakdown of haircutting and the mechanics of haircutting and how it works. So now let's do this side. So I'm just gonna clip this other side away. And we can get cracking on this one. So this is kind of how we teach in our hands-on classes. We like to do different versions so that we can get the most out of what we're learning. So if I was doing the same thing on the other side, you know, it's the same haircut, right? But I want to show you a different approach. And that will kind of tune into half of you, and the other half will tune into the other side. That's how we are as humans. Most people think, no, that's too difficult. I want to do this version. Some people think, that's awesome. I don't want to do that anymore. So, you know, different strokes for different folks, but we'll end up with the same result. So, section off my circular section. So from apex to occipital, I went with the smaller side for today because I don't really want to put that much graduation in on the other side. So I'm going to stick with the same on this side. So we've got a few classes coming up. We've got Knowledge Destroys Fear hands-on classes coming up. We've got one in March. I believe that's almost sold out, March 28th. Then we've got a few classes in May. We've got Knowledge Destroy Fear Razor, which is on May 16th. And then we have another Scissor Knowledge Destroys Fear class, May 23rd. I have a virtual class coming up soon, Shags and More, where I'll be going through lots of different layered shapes, not just shag haircuts, but lots of different options. That's on March 14th. That's a virtual class. And you can sign up for that by just following the link in my bio in my Instagram page. So let's do this. It's the same situation. I'm just going to put my outline in. I'm going to cut it on the heavier side again. The longest of a long bob can be. If it's past the shoulders, it's not a bob, because a bob is an uninterrupted line from front to back. So therefore it has to be above the shoulder. If it touches the shoulders, then it flicks, doesn't it? It's not bobbed anymore then. So I'm going to start in the exact same spot as I did the other side. So what we don't want is we don't want this to jump. So if I start there and get this nice line in, and then I get to here and it jumps, this is over, it's ruined. So I'll start in the tricky area to begin with, because there's no ear behind it and there's no ear in front of it. And you can see I'm releasing any excess tension. I'm allowing the hair to do its thing. It has to look good without you involved. That's like the key thing I can tell you with bobs. They've got to look good without you involved. You don't go home with the bob.
Sometimes.
So I'm just allowing the natural hair texture to do its thing. If this hair was a straighter texture hair, it would be way easier. I wouldn't necessarily need the comb. I could just come in and cut that line. So the comb right now is just adding stability to the hair. It's stopping it from swinging backwards and forwards. It's actually giving me the line to follow. So I'm using it like a pencil and a ruler. Again, keeping that hair nice and wet, because the water will then be pulled through by gravity, and that will help put the hair in a natural fall position. Again, if I tilt the head forward, then I will bevel and graduate this line. I want the first section to be purely one length. I'm now going to graduate the line after it. But if I wanted to graduate this line and turn that line in more, then I would cut the hair with the head forward, right? But I don't want that. I want the same thickness at the roots all the way through to the ends. So I get a pure one length line. So that means this. If I tilt the head forward, I get this. Okay, guys? That's the difference. So it's got nothing to do with it being easier, it's what you're trying to achieve. There's two different effects there. So now I'm going to go into this. So just like the other side, we establish our graduation by pulling our outline down. So the larger the circle, there's going to be more graduation in here. The smaller the circle, there will be more outline and less graduation. So that's the trick to the haircut. So let's get started on this one. I hope you guys are enjoying this. It's Super Bowl Sunday here in the United States. So this is our pre-Super Bowl party.
Superb owl leg.
So what we're going to do now is just go through that circular section. So I'm just going to approach this just like triangular graduation. So vertical diagonal sections, and I'm going to work all the way through towards the front. And I'm going to find that I've already got my outline there. So I'm just going to continue that graduation. Pretty simple stuff. So here I'm allowing my outline to give me the guide to graduate. So again, smaller circular section, less graduation. Larger circular section, more graduation. Get that out of the way. Over direction. I want this to get heavier towards the front, so it's different to the other side. All right, I'm starting in the back and I'm moving towards the front now. So my diagonal forward sections, I'm going to have to pull these backwards. It's really simple. Pull away from what you want to keep. So in this case, I want to keep it heaviest in the front. I'm going to pull it backwards. Now, where do I pull it backwards? I'm not going to pull it everything into number one. If I pull everything backwards into number one, then that drop off of graduation is probably going to be too steep. So from like the corner forward, it will be one length, and from the corner back, it'll be beveled. That doesn't really have any flow from back to front. That's two things living next to each other. They need to be blended. So for me to do that, I really want to just pull the hair straight back. So each section is going to come straight back to an imaginary wall behind the mannequin. And what that will do is that will give me the nicest flow of weight from back to front. So that's my go-to with triangular shapes, because I get this really nice flow of weight from back to front. If I throw it into the center, it's too aggressive, too steep. So just pulling back onto that. And you can see that starts to bevel as well. Let's continue this. So I've already established the outline, guys, first, and I'm using that as the guide to graduate through. So straight back. I'm not pulling the hair down, I'm just pulling it straight back, and I'm using finger angle. So my finger angle is matching the angle of the graduation that was created by me pulling the outline down to begin with. So very classic triangular graduation here, using finger angle and just over direction. So not necessarily using elevation to do this. Because if you think about the elevation I'm using, it's 90 degrees, right? So if I was working this more horizontally, then it would be all about elevation and degrees and me pulling down for it to get heavier. Remember, pull away from what you want to keep. So I'm pulling this straight back to that wall, remember? So again, I'm protecting that outline all the way through. Diagonal sections forward. Straight back. So not pulling that down. If I do that, then we're just going to make it really super heavy. So I'm allowing these vertical sections to make this graduation leaner.
There's people asking questions, but it's like they're all cut off.
Oh, that means we're asking too many questions. Is that what you're saying?
It's like they're not even full questions.
Oh, it's not letting you type that many words. I get it. So pulling backwards, still using that same over direction. So if you look at this angle, Katie, like come and look at my view. So when I'm looking at this, I'm pulling this straight back. Because if you look, that is more on that horizontal side, isn't it? It's technically vertical because once you come over here, guys, look, that's up and down, isn't it? So what I'm doing when I'm back here is I'm making sure that I'm keeping it on the level of the head shape. I don't want to come too low and pull too far in. So it's almost like I'm pulling back onto this like archway, like so. And that's what's keeping this shape triangular and keeping my graduation on that vertical side. So it's leaner. If I was working more this way, then I would be using more pulling down for it to get heavier. So I hope you've enjoyed this. 2 different ways of achieving very similar shapes. So again, look, I'm using over direction back here and then just putting that onto there. So this is making it leaner because I'm pulling this back here and cutting it through vertically instead of pulling this down here traditionally and cutting it like so. So last section, everything back, what reaches. And then you guys can get on with your pre-game activities. For those Americans in the audience. So I'll just check through, make sure I don't have any like little straddlers that stick over. All right. So there, turn this down now. Let's see, we've got our bob outline that we always had. And then now we've just graduated over the top of it. A very lean, heavy, that's a bit weird, lean, heavy graduation. So 2 different ways of achieving it, guys. Just a little recap. You guys can re-watch this later if you joined us late, but I'll just kind of get you back on track as to what I've done before we say goodbye. So what I've done is I've taken a circular section from the apex to the occipital on both sides. And I've established my outline. I've then used this. See, if I pull that out now, I can see a build-up. I've used that as my guide. And I've worked vertical diagonal back sections, pulling straight out from the head shape, no over direction, and I've followed that graduation all the way up. What that's done is it's cut triangular graduation backwards. So this to me is more of an advanced technique in understanding the mechanics of hair cutting. This is your standard, this is what you're used to doing, pulling hair backwards to get heavier in the front on the line. Whereas this side, I showed you how to do that backwards. So this was done front to back. And then on this side, it was the same thing. I took my circular section, I established my outline as my guide. I then took vertical diagonal forward sections and I used the buildup of weight that had been formed by pulling that first section down as my guide to continue that graduation. And so I've got a very traditional, heavy, triangular graduated bob on both sides. but done two different ways. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I want to thank you guys for spending some time with us. Thank you, Hairbrain, for having me on again. It's really nice to be back. And don't forget to sign up for the Hairbrain teaching, which is going to be at Long Beach in June. I'll be there cutting hair. So yeah, come see us.